October 26th. If we could have a roll call, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Time is 10:49, starting with Director Cochran. Giudice?
Here.
Grosboll?
Here.
Hernandez? Verdoni?
Here. Here.
Vice Chair Parr is absent. Chair Abbott?
Here.
And President Terrio. Thank you. You are still a committee of the whole. Also in the room, you have Directors Garbarino, Hill, Maston, and Thier. Thank you very much for all being here.
Great. Thank you all very much. And we'll move on then to item 3, our first item on the agenda, ratification of previous actions by the Auditor Controller. That's on pages 5, 26, and we have PFM here is Monique Spike. Monique, welcome.
She is also a San Francisco.
Monique, welcome, and thank you for all your work.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. And I'm also proud to say that I am a frequent payer of your tolls for the
and we thank you for that.
Good morning. So I head the California practice, and it's my pleasure to be able to speak to you about our strategy for the district's funds this morning. I really want to focus first and foremost on the markets. And for that, I'm going to start on page 10 of the packet agenda, just to set the stage. As you know, we have been in an increasing rate environment for the past few quarters. The Fed has been targeting a strategy to increase the overnight rate in an effort to slow down the economy, to fight inflation. With that, we have been able to invest funds at tremendously attractive rates. If you look on this exhibit here, you can see the 2-year Treasury has risen since September 21st. To a high of 5.04%. And interest rates in general across the yield curve are at 15-year highs. And so what that means is we're very interested in investing your assets in longer term maturity securities to lock in this income for the foreseeable future. I do want to talk about the next page, page 11, which shows on the top the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation, which is the PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, very close to CPI, which is the headline number that you hear about on the news. But the difference between PCE and CPI is that personal consumption expenditure includes costs the consumer has that are borne by someone else. So, for example, medical insurance premiums that may be paid by your employer. Now, what's noticeable about this chart is that inflation has been coming down, and so the Fed's policy has worked. But we've seen a brief spike up at the most recent reading. And then when you count supercore inflation, which we show in the blue, that is the inflation metric excluding food, energy, and housing. Inflation is still fairly high. And so when you strip about all those volatile or lagging measures, it shows that the Fed still has some work to do. So why is that important? Well, for us, it strengthens the argument that we may have one more rate increase this year. And so we may be seeing some higher yielding securities than we have been, which is great news for us. And then on the bottom, we show personal spending, because I think what's really interesting about the inflation strategy is that the consumer really hasn't slowed down on spending dollars. There is still a glut of savings that were, made higher during the pandemic years. Folks are still drawing down those dollars. We're not seeing the consumer stopping there, going out to eat, dining, traveling. And so the spending of the consumer has really propped up the economy and has made it more likely that we'll be able to land this inflation plane in the right way, meaning that we won't see a recession. And to strengthen that argument, the Fed actually increased its projection for GDP for year end to 2.1% from 1% just a couple months earlier. So with that, let's jump to page 16 of your packet just to show some of the recent trade activity we've made in the district's portfolio. Really highlighting the yields we've been able to garner in this market. Because rates have risen tremendously, we've been able to pick up yields well in excess of 5%. So again, that's going to be income that's going to sustain the district for the next few years when rates start to decline ultimately. Across the board, we've been focusing on sectors like credit sectors, purchasing some corporate notes. We've also looked at purchasing commercial mortgage-backed securities, which are federal agencies. Those have been providing excellent income versus treasuries. So our goal is to really take advantage of your investment policy while staying within those guidelines and focusing on sectors that we believe will add ultimate value to you on a going forward basis. The last thing I'll talk about is on page 18 of your packet. Just really wanted to highlight that while we are looking to diversify, we're very careful about making sure that we are being careful with the issuers we allow into the portfolio, maintaining broad diversification across industry and sector. And we believe that the district's portfolio is well positioned to weather any volatility that may occur in the future with regard to interest rates, broad global events, and so on. So with that said, I'll conclude my comments by just stating that we continue to manage consistent with your policy. We believe that your portfolio is well positioned, and we continue to work closely with staff to ensure that your liquidity needs are met. Are there any questions for me?
Great, thank you very much. Very much appreciate that work, especially in these very unusual, continuingly unusual financial times. So appreciate that. Director Hill.
Yeah, just got a simple question. As long as I've been here, looking, the vast majority are automobiles.
Yes.
Is there a particular reason for that, or is it or actually dealing with fossil fuels and everything else? The question: stable?
Yeah.
That's stable.
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually really like automobile asset-backed securities, and the reason for that is when there is an economic downturn, where there is a recession, time and time again it has proved that people are more likely to pay their auto loan bills before any other loans, and so it's a really strong sector in terms of credit. The default rate for auto loan asset-backed securities is very, very low. And the underwriting standards that we require for the asset-backed securities we purchase that are auto loans are very credit-worthy. Our team tends to look at the types of borrowers, the types of cars that are in the package to ensure that we're comfortable with the credit. Yes.
Right now. Thank you.
Welcome, Director Hill.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none. Again, thank you so much for the work. Very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
And I'll bring it back to my colleagues. So this is an action item to accept the report. I'll look for a motion to approve.
Second.
Got it.
We have a motion and a second, and if we could have a roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Voting on item number 3 with the first and second, starting with Director Conroy is absent, Dorsey is absent, and Guardio is absent. Garbarino? Aye. Giudice?
Yes.
Grosboll? Hernandez? Maston? Moulton Peters absent. Parr is absent. Rabbit?
Aye.
Verdoni? Aye. Safai is absent. Snyder is absent. Stephanie is absent. Dear? Aye. Thank you. Second Vice President Hill? First Vice President Cochran? And President Terrio? Thank you. You have 11 ayes.
Great. And I was remiss in not asking if there's any public comment. I didn't see anyone rise.
There are no public comments on the phone or in the room.
Okay, we're good there then. We'll move on then to item 4A, which is the budget increase in the fiscal year 23-24 Bridge Division capital budget for project 1526, of which you just heard in the B&O meeting. And we have John Eberly. John, welcome.
Yes, good morning. So yes, the recommendation this morning is to authorize an increase in the fiscal year 23-24 Bridge Division capital budget in the amount of $1,400,000 relative to project 1526, which is the Golden Gate Bridge suicide deterrent system construction, and this would be funded with district reserves to support the continuation of construction engineering design services. And I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
We have a motion in a second. I'll ask my colleagues if there are any questions. Seeing none, we'll verify real quickly if there's any public comment on this particular item.
We have no public comment on this item.
And with that, a roll call vote.
First and second on 4A, starting with Director Conroy is absent, Dorothy is absent, and Guardio is absent. Garbarino is now absent. Giudice?
Yes.
Thank you. Grosbull?
Yeah,
Thank you.
appreciate that.
Hernandez? Thank you. Maston? Moulton Peters is absent. Parr is absent. Rabbit?
Aye.
Verdoni is absent. Oh, Verdoni, sorry, is not absent. Verdoni is here. Thank you. Safai is absent. Snyder is absent. Stephanie is absent. Dear? Thank you.
I'm actually recusing myself, but I didn't have time to leave the room before you started the vote. So
We are very fast now. So recusal. Okay. Second Vice President Hill? Yes. Thank you. First Vice President Cochran? Yes. And President Terrio? Yes. Thank you. Actually, we are a committee of the whole now that she's recused herself. So we're actually going to have 7 ayes. So we'll be voting as a committee and not a committee of the whole.
Okay. John, thank you very much. Item number 5, which is to authorize actions related to the grant programs. There are none in this particular, so we'll move on then to item number 6, which is to approve the establishment of a new project, the Spalding Replacement Project in the fiscal year 23-24 Ferry Division Capital Project. Michael Hoffman. Another item that we just discussed.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning again. So earlier this year, as you're all aware, as I presented earlier for the B&O committee, staff began working with a naval architect firm to develop plans and specifications to repower the San Francisco and the Marin. And this is a repower that's required by the California Air Resource Board to comply with their recently passed commercial hovercraft amendments. As part of that process, we requested that naval architect firm to develop an impact report so we could better understand what the impacts to the Spalding class vessels would be after repowering them with a Tier 4 engine plus a diesel particulate filter. And just by way of background, the Tier 4 engine has a selective catalytic reducer to attenuate NOx in the exhaust or in the tailpipe of the vessel. And the diesel particulate filter is there to remove particulate matter from the tailpipe emissions of the vessel. And both of those components are roughly the same footprint as the engine themselves. So the space claim in the machinery room, you have to triple essentially to fit those two components with your 2 engines. You have one SCR, one DPF for each engine. So that was kind of the driving force to, hey, we need to really take a look at this and have ask our naval architect firm to dive into what the impacts to the vessel would be. So as outlined on page 2 of the staff report, you can see the negative impacts that we received in that report. I covered them in detail during the B&O. Along with those negative impacts, it became clear that the cost of the repower would be quite a bit larger than staff anticipated. We had a $5 million per vessel estimate, and with the additional work that was required to, or that would be required to repower the boats, the cost is estimated to be at least $10 million per vessel. And that capital project for Spalding Repower is 100% district funded. So with that, we started having a series of internal meetings amongst district staff as well as outreach to Metropolitan Transportation Commission. They did confirm that 2 of the Spalding vessels, the Marin and the San Francisco, are eligible for FTA replacement funds. Given the cost of repower and the FTA eligibility for replacement funding at that 8% level, as well as the negative impacts of the vessel performance, staff determined the best course of action is to replace the Spalding vessels with high-speed catamarans. It is estimated that it will cost $63 million to build 3 vessels replacing the Spaldings. While we only have 2 Spaldings eligible for replacement, they have a max passenger capacity of 750 passengers each. It is undetermined at this time how many passengers a high-speed catamaran will carry, but it will be no more than 500. Since FTA replacement funding considers passenger capacities of the retiring vessels and the new vessels, the district should be eligible for FTA funding on 3 smaller vessels that have a passenger count in the aggregate that is less than the 2 Spaldings. The Spaldings were built in the mid-70s and are approximately 50 years old. They have been through multiple repowers, having originally been powered by gas turbines. It makes sense at this juncture to design new vessels around the COB requirements that will utilize cleaner burning engines and have a hull design that maximizes vessel efficiency. It was designed around that compliant propulsion package. Staff recommends the committee approve establishment of the Spalding replacement project in the amount of $63 million. This concludes my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you very much again, Michael. Appreciate that. I have one quick question for you. Maybe, do we partner with any other ferry operators on designing or purchasing vessels, or do the California-specific regulations kind of make that moot now? And I realize that it's all about timing and there aren't that many operators, but
there's not many operators. We're using the same designer as WIDA, but it's a separate procurement.
Okay.
Our terminal infrastructure is vastly different than WIDA's. So in order to design a vessel that would work for both us and them, it would have a lot of doors.
So it wouldn't be financially prudent to go into a collaboration that way.
The boatyards, they're not like bus manufacturers, where a bus manufacturer might make 2,000 buses a year. Boatyards, bid projects, but we will be standardizing our fleet even further, which helps on the maintenance and operations side as well as training staff side, but also in terms of getting a better price in the procurement.
Gotcha. Anyone else have any questions? Have a motion and a second, just real quickly. Any public comment on this particular item?
We have no public comment on this item.
So with that motion and second, can we have a roll call vote?
Thank you. We are back to being a committee of the whole for this vote. So we have a first and second with a vote starting with Director Conroy, who's absent, Dorsey is absent, and Guardio is absent, Garbarino is absent, Giudice.
Yes.
Grosval, Hernandez, Maston, Moulton Peters is absent, Parr is absent, Rabbit.
Aye.
Rodoni.
Aye.
Zafai is absent, Zero is absent, Stephanie is absent, Deer. Aye. Second Vice President Hill, First Vice President Cochran, and President Girio. Thank you. You have 10 ayes.
Great. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 7, authorize execution of contracts relative to the RFP 2023-D-039. This is for insurance advisors and brokerage services, Inc. Not Kelly Vitale.
Good morning, committee members. Nice to see everybody. So today before you, the item before you request your recommendation to the Board of Directors for the proposal as noted, 23-D-039. And this is for the insurance advisors and brokerage services. And the authorization execution of a contract with USI Insurance Services for a 3-year term for a total not to exceed $384,000 with 2 additional 1-year terms at the district's discretion. And that would include the coverage, the services for the casualty and property lines. The second item for authorization consideration is the execution of a contract again with USI for a 3-year term with 2 1-year additional terms at the district's discretion. And that is for not to exceed $120,000 with $40,000 per option year. And that would cover the district's marine coverage. And just to give you a little information about those 2 separate proposals, the casualty and property insurance includes 9 lines of coverage at a cost of about $5 million. And the marine coverage is 6 lines of coverage at about $1 million cost. So those are the services that USI, that's relative to the advisors and brokerage services that USI provides. And so the district has those 3 distinct programs, and encompassed with them is the 15 different lines of coverage that I've just identified. And so the selection of these brokers is important because First USI has partnered with us for the last 15 years. Most recently in 2020, they actually started partnering with us on the marine side as well. And they bring to us a service that doesn't just include shopping in the market to get us the best premiums. They really, really know our business. And most importantly, the change that they made in our marine program was that they introduced us to the London club we're part of a pool, and they put us in this pool in London with it's world nationally known, And because of that, what it did was it brought down our excess coverages and our costs. And in our prior years, since I'd been here, our marine coverage was actually $2 and $3 million, and we actually brought it down this year, this last February, to $1 million. And that's just because of their knowledge of the marine world and the lines of coverage that we need. And having us in this steamship club really helped to absorb some of those costs because we're in such a big pool now. And so the RFP went out on July 16th. There was an addendum issued on August 4th, and 3 firms submitted proposals by August 15th. Those 3 firms were USI, Willis Towers Watson, and Aon Risk Services. A 4-member committee reviewed the qualifications, and those qualifications had their measurements were based on the following criteria. That was the firm's qualifications and experience, their approach to the scope of services that we needed, the social equity, and the cost proposal. We had 4 reviewers that came from the district secretary's office, the auditor controller's office, the deputy general manager's office, and then myself from risk management. USI scored the highest for both segments of insurance, for the property casualty and marine. And as I mentioned previously, they have been a partner for over 15 years. The recommendation would be that the committee recommend to the board that USI is awarded the district's casualty and property insurance pursuant to the RFP number noted 2023-D-039 for a not to exceed cost of $384,000 for the 3-year contract with 2 additional 1-year terms at $128,000. And then the second recommendation that we're requesting is the district's marine insurance program through USI with the same RFP number for a total not to exceed $120,000 for a 3-year contract with 2 additional 1-year terms at about $40,000 per year. And I wanted to mention that the district's disadvantaged business enterprise evaluated the casual property and marine programs and determined that their proposal to be responsive to the DBE requirements. And there was no contract-specific DBE or small business. USI was able to obtain almost a 6% DBE participation. And so the staff recommends this for approval. I'll take any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Appreciate that. I know insurance, the insurance world has been difficult in the last so many years, so appreciate you getting the best deal for the district. I'll look to my colleagues for any questions, comments, or concerns. Not seeing any, although I know that everyone is looking forward to having lunch at the Steamship Club one of these years. So
I'll see what I can do.
Sounds like quite the place. Is there any public comment?
We have no public comment on this item.
If I could get a motion?
So moved.
In a second. We have a motion and a second. With that, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Thank you. We're voting on item number 7. The first and second, starting with Director Conroy is absent, Dorsey is absent, Guardio is absent, Garbarino is absent, Giudice,
Yes.
Groswell, Hernandez, Maston, Moulton Peters is absent, Parr is absent, Rabbit,
Aye.
Rodoni,
Aye.
Safai is absent, Snyder is absent, Stephanie is absent, Thier, aye, Second Vice President Hill, First Vice President Cochran, and President Thirio. We have 10 ayes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you again. Moving on then to item number 8, which is to receive the updated 5- and 10-year financial projection. And we have Joe Wire, and this is on pages 47 to 72.
Okay, thank you very much. This is as mentioned, the 5- and 10-year financial projection. And just a little background, it's the sort of if we have a 3-legged stool of our financial stewardship here at the district. You have this projection, and then we have usually some sort of financial or strategic plan, and then we have the budget. And we rotate through those every year and review them, update them, and make sure that we keep the ship of state sort of sailing in the proper direction and financially solvent. This one it has a number of reports that you see in the back, data that goes behind it, but it's really not that scary. It's a relatively simple statement. In fact, you don't approve it; you just receive it. It's something that lets you sort of know where we are as an institution. It's intended to give you you and the public an understanding of if the organization keeps going in the direction it's going today, what's going to happen eventually. And it primarily focuses, of course, on the financial side because it is a financial projection. And just spoiler alert, it always hits the rocks. And we've had lots of conversations over the years about this. I've had reporters ask me about it. I've had board members ask me about it. And the nature of your business, 100 years ago, this institution got a charter from the state, and the state said, if you guys are crazy enough to build a bridge, knock yourselves out, but you're going to pay for it. And guess what? You can charge a fee to users to pay for that bridge. And so we've been doing that ever since. We're a user fee-based agency. And anybody who runs a small business or anything else like that knows if you keep selling the same item for the same price forever, you go broke. And that's essentially what this projection says. You have to change the prices of the products that you sell, or the cost, or both, in order to keep your business afloat. And that's all it really says. And we'll go into a little bit more detail than that, but that's essentially the takeaway. And what's important about it is that when you're appointed to this board, your very difficult job is to change those prices. And it is a difficult job, and I'm not making light of it. It's never easy. No one likes to change prices on their customers. We have obviously we have very passionate customers about our services and ones who need our services. So it's a very critical job, but unfortunately, part of the role is to change those prices because we don't have very little control over the inputs, in other words, the costs. And in our case, the biggest cost is people like me, sitting across the table from us, and Amaret. We're the staff, and the staff is your single largest cost to keep a service industry going. And then after that, of course, the cost of many of the capital projects that you heard about in some of the earlier meetings today, those prices also go up. And so in order to meet that demand for essentially more resources, you have to change the prices. So that's the quick summation of where we are, and then we'll take a look at the report. So if you quickly look at it, this page starts on page 47. It's a 5 and 10 year, means it starts next fiscal year and goes out 10 years. And we give you two different numbers. What we found over the years is that it's more reasonable for the district to plan in a 5-year horizon. The 10-year horizon got too long. It's too far out there. And so 5-year tends to be where we've been focusing over time, and we'll probably continue to do that, but that's a policy call by the board as we go forward and look at things. It doesn't mean we're not planning longer. Our planning departments and our other departments are looking out much longer, of course, as you've heard, the whole conversation you have on the ferry vessels. That will take considerably more than 5 years. The other important thing about it is it assumes, as I mentioned, costs will change. It assumes that revenues do change, like ones that for example, we get some tax revenues from Marin and Sonoma counties for providing public transit service in those counties. That assumption changes. MTC provides us with assumption changes, and we put those in here. So they grow because it's based on a tax. You can assume a tax will grow to some degree over time, at least in our counties. Other prices, of course, don't change. If you haven't taken an action, for example, in the bridge division, we have the bridge tolls. The last toll increase of the last 5-year plan occurred 3 months ago. We will be bringing forward very soon, as early as next discussion, to you guys talking about starting another consideration of another long-term toll increase plan. Because, again, as I mentioned earlier, that's how we exist, basically, is that issue. You've already looked at and done a 5-year toll increase plan. 5-year fare increase plan. So those increases over the first 5 years, they're incorporated into your projection. But then at a point, there are no further increases because the board hasn't taken action to do so. It's just to that sense. So you have there's a slight imbalance there between revenues and expenses. But as I mentioned in the beginning, it's very important because that informs people of the actions that need to be taken going forward to fix our projection deficit. All right, take a look at the next page, which is page 48. We talk a little bit about the reserves, and what I want to talk about is if we have a projected deficit, we have 3 basic sources of revenue. We have the operating earnings, money that we make by running our business. We have grant funds, capital funds that we receive from some relatively formulaically, like for transit, rolling stock, things of that nature. You mentioned the bus with the ferries. We expect to get 80% of those ferries covered. So those are types of assumptions are made in this projection. And then we make some other assumptions about grant funds, especially in the bridge area, where we've had historical success in getting revenues, and we expect to get them in the future. But we do show you at the end of the report that if we don't, it's going to dramatically increase your. If you don't get more grant funds, it's going to make the deficit go up, and that's pretty short. Pretty common sense. And then lastly, we have the money that you have in reserves, and that goes in helping to fund your long-term projection. It's important to remember that you have reserves, and they're considerable, but we have also considerable needs, and we'll talk about that in a second. The important thing about the reserves are total money that you earned yesterday and put in the bank, and that's essential for this organization to exist. We always need to be adding money to the bank because it's going out to fund future capital projects all the time. In fact, we're required on almost every capital project we do where we get any sort of grant source, we're always the local people, which is us, we are required to put some form of revenue into that to match. And all of you who work on other boards, of course, are aware of that. Our form of matching revenue is toll funds. So we have to have that toll funds in the bank in order to match it, or they won't give us the money in the first place. And the chart on page 48 is one you've seen in the budget. We've been using it for years. Of course, it gets updated each year. It essentially says, yes, you have substantial reserves. And in this case, almost 300 million. But if you turn the page to the next one, which we also use regularly, on the next page, it shows you that you're going to allocate those revenues quickly. In fact, most of them will be allocated. That's the red line. Most of them will be allocated pretty shortly, primarily because we're going to be in the next year plus putting out some formal construction contract for the Size Redford project. And that is the big project we've been saving money for almost 2 decades. The blue line is how the money spends out of the bank. And of course, it spends out at a lower rate because capital projects are notoriously lumpy as in the way the money goes out. It doesn't go out X amount every month like it does with, say, salaries and expenses, but it goes out when we get to meet milestones of a particular construction project or other project. So that goes out slower. And the important point of this chart is this chart looks like it does, and it pretty much always has looked like it does because we've done a good job managing our organization. That means that we expect that if you look out into the future, eventually that line will cross over to where you don't have any money anymore. But the important thing is if we balance our operating budget, we're putting money back into the bank every year going forward. And that will keep moving these lines outward, and we'll never get to the point where it goes in the line if we balance the operating budget. And that's the hardest task that we have right now, and that's your strategic plan. We'll be looking at that is because, of course, due to the pandemic, we don't have the same business that we used to have, the same customer. We don't have as many. And that's a critical point that we'll be working on in the coming to make sure that we balance the budget, which then keeps the inflows going so we have enough to run the outflows so we have a long-term success at providing service to our customers. Then on page 50 is the actual projection. And just to make things a little more interesting, we have 2 projections. We have the first one that you'll see here on page 50, which is the traditional one, the one we've always used in the past. What we do is we take the budget, as I mentioned, the three legs of the stool. The budget was passed a couple of months ago, and we project off that budget. And that's what this one is. It's projected off the budget that we passed. It shows 5 years, almost $500 million, 10 years over $1 billion. And I'm not trying to make those numbers, take them lightly, but they are built on an aspirational budget, which our customers have not needed us to spend. So as you know, each month talk about that we're not spending as much as we put in the budget because we're not putting service out there that our customers are not using. And so we don't expect actually this to be, at least right now, we don't expect this to be a projection. Of course, if our customers all came back, we could look more like this, but not at this point. So we did add a second projection, which is something we did also last year for these, and that's on page 52. And that second projection approximately takes the service you have on the road today. And it says, and the level of service you're providing today. It says, okay, we look forward in the future based on that, which is a little different than what we do. It's not your budget, but it's sort of what your expenditures are actually running. And then we look at that projection. And that projection says, well, the first 5 years we're looking for a couple $100 million, $220 million, and over 10, that would be over 600, 680, 679. So those numbers are still very large. Don't get me wrong, they're very large numbers. but they are probably more realistic with where we are today, where we're starting at this point. And that would, if is in the past, future past boards have taken those, especially the 5-year number, and use that as sort of a target as they're looking at their strategic planning initiatives and looking at their pricing of their product and the expenses they have to control as they build future budgets. It's been that sort of $220 million number that we've been looking at. And as I mentioned, we update it every year. It will change every year with ours. Where we've raised more revenues, it will change. If we have expenses increase, it will change. So we'll keep looking at it. It'll keep being there. But it's the one we've used as our guide in the past. And now, going to the end of the report, page 54. Next steps with this, as I mentioned, the board just receives this. It's a piece of information. It's used in our planning by your staff and has been used by past boards going forward. So essentially the next step is we look at strategic planning. Well, as you folks were aware, you have a strategic planning initiative underway right now. In fact, the advisory committee is meeting tomorrow after the board meeting. The advisory committee is working on a strategic plan. Part of that plan will also be ways to improve the financial future of the district. So that's underway. Lastly, as I mentioned, there are a lot of appendices here. The key ones are we have a number of assumptions to make any projection. Those are in B, and we tend to borrow those from other groups. The 10-year capital plan, just so you're aware, the 10-year capital plan that was in your budget, all those projects, those are in your projection. It's assuming that you're going to do all those projects over the time period with which they're in the plan. So if someone says, is my project in the projection? Yes, it is. It's in the project. It's in there. If it's in the budget, it's in the projection. And then lastly, we do have what is the key element that came out of this many years ago was the capital contribution calculation, and that is based on the amount of projects we have. What kind of capital contribution do we need to make each year in the budget in order to fund the bank so we can pay for these future capital projects? And that one calculation is done in this report, and then we use that forward. So that contribution is sort of how I can safely make the statement that if you balance your budget, which means you raise the money for that capital contribution, then we will be able to pay for all the future capital projects and keep our business running smoothly going to the future. And with that, I'm open to any questions.
Joe, thank you very much. Appreciate that, as always, and thank you for walking us through it. I'll look to my colleagues and see if there's any Director you to say.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just want to thank staff. Really connected a lot of dots for me, and I really appreciate it. Thanks.
President Theriault.
Joe, I'm going to be picayune, but not very. If you go to page 65 in Appendix C, 65 in the packet, under Ferry Division, Revenue Vehicles, the last two items are a Spalding DPF retrofit carb mandate and a Spalding Tier 4 repower carb mandate. Didn't we just decide not to do that?
The future is always changing things. Isn't that awesome? Now, did we save money or did we spend money on that last idea? That's what I'm not so sure. I think we actually may have saved money on that last idea, but but you bring up a really good point. I mean, this was. I'm not even sure when we were together if it was already dated, and it's dated, and that's the nature of of our cyclical process. As you know, we go through it every year so we can update these. And next time you see this, because you've added that project to your budget, it will of course be sitting in here in place of those, and these will be out, along with other changes too. That won't be the only difference.
Anyone else? I got one question for you, Joe. Just looking at that on that second today's service level and the expenditures, the more realistic approach, the 220 as a percentage of the overall budget. I mean, I know numbers sometimes, obviously, as you project forward and the tolls come in, it'll get reduced. As a percentage, what are we talking about?
The budget is approximately $250 million a year, and that number's for 5 years.
Right.
So if you took that'd be a $1.2 billion. So 1 in 6, 1 in 7. So 1 in 6 would be 18%, 17, 15. So somewhere in the high teens. I can't quite do it as quickly, but say a percent of the budget would be somewhere in the high teens.
And you're so good at that, and knowing that the future is still yet to be decided. Right. As a percent, I'm just kind of wondering: how much is that as cuts? How much of that is additional revenue?
Well, if you follow the footsteps of your predecessors, you will have a multiple year toll increase coming up, and that will probably raise half of that. Right there. And then you will have some work. The other large dollar one that we do each time we do a strategic plan is we look at your capital project proposals and make sure that they are placed in the proper years and in a order which they can actually be implemented. Occasionally they stack up, and we've got more. In other words, our you say is your desire is bigger than your stomach can digest. In other words, we desire more projects than we can digest, and when we flatten out the capital plan, that often saves on the contribution we've needed, which also cuts back on some of the expenditures.
If I could jump in also, instead of cuts, think of it as efficiencies, because in prior plans you've come up with ideas that you've implemented that have reduced costs without affecting the quality of the service. You've done that for retiree medical benefits by providing a different way, same quality, same doctors, just lower cost to us. You've done that for how we provide medical benefits to our employees, with the suggestion that actually came from the ATU to go to CalPERS Medical. And, we've done that with all electronic tolling. We're the bridge in the country to it. One of your prior plans said, here's a way we could do our job more efficiently at less cost. So you have a history as an organization of being creative through your strategic planning process and coming up with ideas of things that create a work for staff that we implement over the coming years that chips away at this. So it's never one thing. It's a combination of things that look at the cost side and the revenue side of the ledger. But looking at the cost side is not always cuts. It's oftentimes ways to do things better, more efficiently, to get more value for our ratepayers.
I appreciate that very much, and I know that going forward, obviously, we're in a different world. So it's that old whether the glass is empty or half full, and look at that. But I just wanted to make sure that I understood that number in context of what we're trying to achieve going forward. But thank you, Dennis. We have attrition in there as well, as and it's certainly not what we did pre-pandemic, because as you said, it's based on the service levels of today, which is less than that. Again, any other, Director Hill?
I got a question. How do you handle things like the suicide barrier? Two prices of a total job, cost.
The suicide insurance project is in the capital plan and in the capital budget, and its expenditures for that project, as it was in this case, we've already awarded that contract. So those contract costs are in this plan, and that would be it. I don't know if you want to know services, for example, they say legal services. We have legal services in our operating budget, and every year your general counsel puts together a budget going forward, and it includes some costs associated with all the work that they're doing. And in this particular case, it does include some costs associated with legal work on the suicide insurance project. And so they would be incorporated, and then that number is then inflated out. So there is some money for that too. It's not, directly a one-on-one relationship with what it might or might not be, what future costs might or might not be for that. But there is some money available for that.
Anyone else? Not seeing any other hands raised. I'll ask real quickly if there's any public comment on this particular item.
We don't have any public comment, but if you don't mind, we could try and poll. We do have some people that joined the line. I can see it here.
Yeah, please do.
If we could. Justine, would you like to take a second and then pull the line just to see if we have any public comment for this item?
Certainly. Is there anyone new that's joined us that would like to speak on this item? Please use ** to unmute yourself. I'm not hearing anybody.
Great. Then I'll look to my colleagues. The action in front of us is to receive the updated 5 and 10 year financial projection.
So moved.
So I have a motion and a second. If we could have a roll call, please.
Thank you. We have a first and second on item 8, starting with Director Conroy, who's absent, Dorsey is absent, and Guardio is absent. Garbarino is absent. Giudice.
Yes.
Grosbaum, Hernandez, Maston, Moulton Peters is absent, Parr is absent, Rabbit is absent, Rabbit. I'm on autopilot.
Yeah. Here. Yes, here and I.
Okay. Rodoni.
Aye.
Safai is absent. Snyder is absent. Stephanie is absent. Here. Aye. Second Vice President Hill. First Vice President Cochran. And President Dario. You're just throwing your humor into this now. Thank you. And you have 10 eyes.
I must say, just on that item, I really appreciate, because we don't get a lot of multi-year projections in a lot of the boards that I'm on in government, and it's so nice to actually have that. As imperfect as it is, it's still really nice to be able to look over the horizon a little bit. And certainly the short term is more, the margin of error is much smaller than the long term, but it's really a great guide to have. So I appreciate that totally. We'll move on to item.
Thing to that,
Please.
When we first started doing this, we were in a very bad situation, and one of the things that this also was enabled me to talk to the board about is that, and you just brought it up in a different way, was even if that projection says that you don't have, say, 15 or 17% of the money that you have that you need, that you would want, you have 83%. And that's a huge amount of money, and you can do a lot of good with it. And that's always really important to keep remembering, that you can do so much good with that much money. It's hundreds of millions of dollars every year is being put into services that you provide. And there's a lot of power behind that. And that's the important thing also to remember. So I wouldn't call it the margin. Our deficit is bigger than I'm comfortable with, sure, as your CFO. But, and we're going to do something about it. But it is still, it's not everything. Everything is that huge core that we do have, and there's some money that we do have and what we can do with it. So a lot of great things going forward.
Appreciate that, Joe. Thank you. Moving on to 9, the status report on the fiscal year 23-24 budget, speaking of which, back to Joe.
Yes, and as I've mentioned recently on this particular report, it is we're not expecting it to change very much. This is your first quarter, so we'll just take it really quickly. We expect, as you know, that there to be a deficit. That deficit, the shortfall this year, is going to be met by the use of federal one-time funding. And we expect to use less of that federal one-time funding than we originally projected, and that shows up on line 1 of the table on page 75. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take it from there. Otherwise, the report is got the monthly earnings in our various divisions in detail in the appendices.
Always appreciate it. Anyone have any questions on this? Director Tier.
Yes, I have a question. You said that the use of the ARP funds was less than you expected. What do you attribute that to?
Basically, two, and they appear on lines 3 and lines, well, 3 things actually, 3, 4, and 5. The current revenues that we're getting are higher than we expected. Both tolls and transit fares are up, and those are more details in those reports in the appendices to this particular report. And then also the revenues that we get from non-operating revenues, those are from grant funds and other things, they are up slightly. And the biggest difference, though, is the expenses that we projected in the budget, that we budgeted for, are lower. And that is because we are not providing the level of services of our aspirational budget, as we call it, could have allowed us to provide if our customers had come back. Since our customers are, I think mentioned at the transportation meeting, slowly coming back, incrementally, piece by piece, but not at the rate that was originally budgeted for. So that expense savings also shows up on line 5. We're projected expense savings so far.
Great. Anyone else have any questions? Appreciate that. No action is required on this item, so we'll move on to 10. Back to Joe again for the monthly review of the Golden Gate Bridge traffic tolls, bus, ferry, transit patronage fares for the 3 months ending September.
Yes, and I am going to have you take a quick look at page 85. That's the table. And really was to point out something that Dennis mentioned at the transportation meeting, is that your business did have a good summer, July, August, and September, compared to where we were the year before. And that's it's those 2 sets of boxes. So you look at the one on the right and the left-hand side are the paid ridership and patronage. The top box, of course, is the bridge one. And if you go to the fifth column over from the left, it says comparing last year, 22-23, with this year, 23-24, and the growth rate through the first quarter was 3.5%. So that means in bridge, our bridge traffic was 3.5% higher than it was the year before, and that's a good thing. I mean, absolutely. And it's higher than we would normally expect to see, but we are still coming out of the pandemic, so we're hoping to see larger growth than normal because we're coming out of the pandemic where we were very low at one point. Bus and ferry, if you look at, just follow that column down to the next two bold lines, one for bus and one for ferry. Bus 9% up over the same period last year, and ferry almost 25%. Ferry had a very good special service section, which I think has been discussed at these meetings in the past. The special service ballpark and others did quite well. So these are our better months. I know that's my other side of the coin statement. These are our best months, and so we're not expecting to see potentially, obviously, as high levels in the winter months. On the other hand, we'd like to see the winter months a little higher than last winter. And if otherwise, you have your following reports are the 5-year comparison, back pre-pandemic, and then before that is just the previous year budget to actual. And I'll leave those. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer it.
Any questions for Joe on this one? Before we'll take public comment afterwards, but why don't you roll through on
Sure.
item 11, the monthly review of the financial statements.
Great. If we go to page 91 next, that is the financials for the first quarter. This includes your all 4 divisions. The detail is in following this first page on page 91. We have line item detail for each of the 4 divisions, bus and ferry, and a consolidated. But we'll just focus on the table in the middle of the page of page 91. And if you look at that table on the far right-hand side is our current year. And starting at the top, we have about $61.6 million in revenue. And then the second bold line down is the consolidated expenses at 53.6. And that produces a revenue over expenses so far through the first 3 months of almost $8 million. That is without any outside funding, anybody else's source of funding, just our own normal expenses. So very good right now. And as I mentioned, these are our better months. We do not expect to see such large differences. I mean, the expenses will be relatively similar going into the next quarters. Unfortunately, the revenues will not be similar going into the next quarters. They will drop some. But we're hoping that they don't drop too much and that we stay close to this new level of being positive. It's a very good statement to have so far. So we do expect, of course, that we don't end the year positive. That's what we projected, but things have been better than we hoped so far. And with that, any questions? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next of the monthly reports, and that is the financial statements to do with capital. And these are, again, the first quarter. Both we discussed in this report, both the capital expenditures and the capital revenue sources. The first quarter, if it was running at 100%, we would have spent 25% of the budget. We're at 18%. That's actually very good, the way capital spends out. There's nothing to be concerned one way or the other. And the details on which divisions and how they're spending is in this report. And I would take that if there are any questions. Otherwise, I will take questions on the last 3.
Any questions for Joe? Seeing none, why don't you just keep rolling, Joe?
The next one is actually Kelly.
Oh, okay. We'll go to item number 12. Thank you, Joe.
Sure.
We'll go back to Kelly for item number 12, which is the review of the district's fiscal year 23-24 first quarterly report of judgments or settled claims. And that's on 107, page 107.
Good morning again. So this is just an informational item for your review, but just to give you a snapshot, the settlements for the quarter ending September 30th included 17 total workers' comp claims, and that involved 8 different employees with 10 general liability claims, and 9 of those were auto and bodily injury, and 1 was a civil rights. So that's the synopsis of your settlements through September 30th. Any questions?
Any questions for Kelly? Looks like we're good. Thank you so much again for the work. Appreciate it. back to Joe for this case, item 13, review of the auditor controller's first quarterly report on the authorized budget adjustments, budget transfers.
Yes, thank you. The title is exactly that. We have not had any changes in the operating budget through the first quarter, and the capital budget just had three. Only one of them with a financial implication, and that was where the general manager exercised the authority that you grant through the budget to move a project in from the project list into the budget because staff had time to implement it. And I will. Why don't I do the second one, and then you can have questions on either of them? Okay.
That'd be great.
The second report is the procurement activities that have taken place on the general manager's authority, and in that case, there are always a lot of activity going on in the procurement department. There are approximately $5 million, almost $6 million worth of activity going on in these departments. They're detailed in the attached list, and if there are any specific questions on those, I'm happy to answer them. And I'll take questions on either of the two reports.
Looking for my colleagues, any questions? Not seeing any. Again, thank you, Joe, for all the information. Appreciate it. Just to check on those items to make sure there's no public comment on, I think that was probably from item 9 through 14.
Correct. We have no public speakers for items 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14.
Great. Thank you very much. And before we continue, item 15 on the agenda, which is closed session. If there are no objections, I would like to accommodate the public and take item 16, public comment now instead of after closed session. Are there any objections to taking public comment now? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, is there anyone from the public wishing to address this committee under item 16, public comment?
I'm checking the public comment right now, and it appears that no one's unmuting themselves and wanting to speak. What we're going to do is during closed session, we will give a last round just in case, and we'll do a little check. And I'll let you know if we come back into open session if there's any speakers.
All right, thank you. Thanks also everyone for their patience during our meetings today. We'll be placing the public on hold for the duration of our closed session item and return to closed session to adjourn the meeting. And our attorney, Kim Manolius, will take us into closed session. Kim, turn it over to you.
Thank you. At this time, the committee will go into a conference with legal counsel regarding existing litigation under Government Code Section 54956.9A for a case that's listed on the agenda, Victor Vallejos versus Multigate British Highway Transportation District.
Great. And if you're not required to be here, we'll look forward to you returning later.
Thank you for your patience while we're in closed session. I'd like to take the opportunity to see if there's anybody that has any public comment that wasn't able to unmute themselves when we made the announcement. If so, please use ** to unmute yourself and let me know. I'd also like to find out if there's anybody who believes they'll have public comment for OPEB, which is the next meeting coming up. If you could use ** to unmute yourself and let me know, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, I'm not hearing anyone. Thanks so much.
Again, thank you all for your patience. We are back in open session. And Kim, can you please report on closed session, please?
Thanks, Chair Rabbit. Committee met in closed session as noted on the agenda and provided appropriate guidance as to how the matter should be handled.
Great, thank you. And moving on, we're on our last item, which is a motion to adjourn. I have a motion in a couple seconds, and seeing no objection, we are adjourned. Thank you.